Welcome, everybody. It's day 16, and on the screen with my friend Kelly Gallagher is Eben Plese. Eben, so good to see you. Eben and I taught together at Kennett High School, and so far back, like how young of a teacher were you when we first hired you in English?
That was my first year teaching, so that was 1998. I think I was about 25 or 26 years old. I think I had a year between my BA and my master's, and so I was a little bit older than the average first year teacher, but not by much.
Oh my gosh, because I started at Kennett 1997, so you were one of the first people that we hired, and from the University of New Hampshire, which was always like, if you come from there, we know you've got good thinking about writing. And we were so excited to hire you, but you terrified me when you sent out the email that said, does anybody want to write Friday at 7:30? Let's gather in the department office and do some writing. And I was like, oh, we write. And I'll never forget, you sat by the window. They were all crowded in that little department office. And you said, let's just write about morning. And I remember I'd written 7:30 on my little notepad. And I was like, write about morning? Like, who is this guy? What are we doing? But then it was probably 4 or 5 of us that stayed together and wrote together for the next many years.
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly, it was the only time I ever did that. The only time I ever managed to get people like that together. I don't even know if I tried when I was in up or actually down south a little further in Dover, and the national schools have always been too small to try to get something like that together. So that may have been the only time I ever did that. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I learned so much writing with other people, having a little writing group. I'd never had one. But now you have been living in the Ukraine. So could you talk about what has happened with you and your family?
Yeah, so I mean, the long story is that after I left Kennett in 2000, I joined the Peace Corps and spent 2 years in Ukraine, and I met my wife there. And we kind of bounced around a lot, but we ended up back in Ukraine twice, actually. The first time in 2015, and then again we came back in 2019. And we've been living there, and so the kind of going back home in a way has been marred, but we got about 6 months of normal life, and then we got hit by COVID and all the lockdowns, and we all know that story. And then all of the news of the buildup of Russian troops on the border, sort of going through that, and even making jokes, because we went back home for the winter break this winter, and kind of making jokes about, oh, well, I hope Ukraine's going to be there when we get back. And we got back, and kind of things just started getting more and more serious. So end of January, the State Department recommended that all Americans living in Ukraine should leave. Basically, the message was leave while you can by commercial means, because we won't be able to help you if, everyone has that picture of Afghanistan when they were literally like sending out flights and getting everybody out. And essentially the State Department said, we're not going to do that here. We're not, like, get out if you can. So
wow.
My job is not school based. I travel for my work, and I kind of work from home already. So it was pretty easy to make the decision just to go. And yeah, we thought it was going to be for a few weeks, and I literally actually almost booked a flight back a week. The week before the war started, we were that there was news coming that Russia was pulling people from the border. They were finishing up their training sessions, and they were going to go. And there's even pictures, like people. I had one of our schools is in Minsk, and the director there was sending me videos of people that have been driving to the border with all these convoys of trucks leaving and everything. And so I said, all right, well, I guess we get to go back now. And I went on this is a week before things started, and I almost bought a flight back, but I said, well, just wait and make sure this is real.
Wow.
So the day we would have arrived back if we had gone back was Wednesday, and the war started on Thursday morning. So in retrospect, it was probably best we didn't do that.
Probably. So your kids
mentioned that you thought it was only going to be a few weeks. Why did you come to that conclusion?
You know, like when you're seeing news from the States, and I've been through this kind of stuff before. I've been through protests. I've been through, you know, smaller unrest. We weren't in Ukraine during the Maidan revolution, but I had friends that were, and you know, when you watch the news, you know that all that stuff is happening in one tiny little place, and everywhere else that, you know, life goes on as it normally does. And so, you know, you get these messages from everybody about, you know, that, like, are you reading the news? You know, that Russia's going to invade, and this isn't the first time this has happened, where there's been troops lined up at the border, and so just, I think that your logic is, well, of course that's not going to happen, and you know, you're literally walking the streets, making plans for next week, and you know, all of the things that you do in a normal life, and it's really hard, I think, to conceptualize the idea that those things can't happen. You know, I mean, the hardest thing has been like sort of feeling, for me personally, has been feeling like I'm kind of stuck right now. Like I haven't booked, I mean, so we go home every summer. I haven't booked flights back home. And it's not because I think that I'm going to go back to Ukraine, because I don't think it's going to happen this year. But it just feels strange to make that decision to book those flights from here. And this is sort of strange, like, yeah, being stuck.
Yeah. Well, your kids are 9 and 11, and they were in the Kiev school, right?
Yeah, they were in the Kiev school. They've been in international schools for all but 2 years of their lives. So
I remember early on, several weeks ago when we were emailing, and you said that on the news you saw people from the school trying to escape.
not quite that. So, you know, so we have teachers, some of our local teachers. So they, you know, use there's two communities outside of Kiev, Irpin and Bucha. Those are kind of like little suburbs of Kiev, and they're not like, when you think of suburbs in Ukraine, it's not like US suburbs. It's not this sort of sprawl, you know, like there's a lot of nothing, and then there's these these areas here. But anyway, that's where all of these kind of cottages and condo style, very, very modern communities were popping up for very inexpensive. And so we had a lot of people that were buying property out there because it was, you know, half-hour drive to get to the school, because we're on that end. The school is on that end of Kiev. And very affordable and expensive, a lot of outdoor space, beautiful spots. And so we have people that lived in those areas, and a couple people were actually decided they were going to stay there. And so all of it, like during a lot of the invasions, a lot of the difficulties. And so one of the teachers in particular was in that, like that, you saw that picture on the cover of the New York Times of the group of people trying to flee underneath that bridge there.
Yeah.
She was, I don't know if she was in that picture, but she was in that area when she was getting out of the city. So.
One of your colleagues, one of your people you knew. I mean, that's really brings it so close to home.
Yeah, it's been going on long enough where it's sort of a lot of the sort of shock is past. And right now Kiev is very, very calm. And that's really where that's where a lot of my association is with Ukraine. But I mean, I spent time in Sumy, I spent time in Kharkiv. I've never been to Mykolaiv, so I can't say, don't know about there. But even just seeing pictures of parts of Kiev that were being hit early in the early days was very, just surreal. Like I don't know. I mean, it sounds like I'm maybe making it sound less impactful than it should be, but it's really surreal to watch all of that happen. Like once you get past the horror of it and the fact that there are people that I know that are directly affected by this, that have had homes destroyed, that are, are wondering what they're going to do for work next year. Like once you get past all that, there's also just this really strange quality of seeing images that you don't associate with home. And this place is like a home, you know.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
I hope this isn't a dumb question, but in Kiev, has school resumed?
I I think it probably will soon. So right at the time that things started, Ukraine basically shut down schools all over the country.
Mm.
And at this point, probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, they went to some kind of online learning. And for some, because there were people living in the subway stops. And they, I mean, Kiev, like the Ukraine put in internet access in there, and so there were kids that were going to school in these subway stops, like an online school and everything. I don't believe that Kiev has gone back in person at this point. I mean, I know our school isn't, but that's a different story. But I know that they're trying to do some form of online schooling. So.
Wow.
Unimaginable in a subway stop.
It is. I'm
Well,
wondering, go ahead.
They were built as bomb shelters after World War II. This is one of the big pieces of irony that people have talked about is that these were built by the Soviet Union. These subways were built in the 50s and 60s and 70s, built by the Soviet Union, and now the only time they're being utilized as bomb shelters is to protect them against Russian bombs, which is just again mind-bending. But they were built to be bomb shelters.
And the people who are fleeing this horror, do they have access to accurate information? Is that like, how do they stay informed? Is that a problem?
I mean, I think it's important to know that there's some kind of propaganda on all sides, and so accurate information, no matter what, is a little bit difficult to come across. But I don't know if you guys are familiar with Telegram. It's another chat app, and it is different than other chat apps in that it allows people to set up a channel, essentially, a little bit like Twitter, actually, and to post news on it. And so I started with Telegram actually because it was where you could get the daily COVID numbers. Every morning it would send out the numbers of how many people are infected, and you could kind of watch in real time like how the city was doing and how the country was doing. On February 24th, those immediately turned into channels for providing news on the war. And there's, at this point in time, I probably have 7 or 8 different channels that I'm following that kind of give updates on the news. And so that's how everybody in Ukraine is getting their news, because it's instantaneous. As soon as Zelensky gives a speech, he puts it up on Telegram, and you can watch it right there as soon as it's done. It is, because of the nature of this kind of communication, though, it's not always verified information. There is a little bit of a jingoistic quality to it sometimes, that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with. At the same time, it's also, there's a lot that's inspiring about it, because even these channels, in one scene will have this update of the Ukrainian army destroying a column of Russian soldiers, and literally the next posting will be, here are some resources for you if you're feeling depressed, and how to help you and how to support those things. And so it's there's also something really positive, I think, that's coming out of that kind of communication. So.
It's so interesting because Tom Friedman in the New York Times had a column where he says this is really the first world war because of how connected. You can't hide. There's so many ways now that you can find out what's happening that your governments can't suppress it.
That's an interesting follow-up to the propaganda piece, though, because governments can certainly twist it and send out, and we're seeing that, right? So, wow. Even the closest I've been, I worked at the Budapest school in Hungary. And I just thought if you could give us some insight into, I found that small, beautiful little school on a hill, an amazing place for kids. Could you talk a little bit about what international schools are like? Because that's where your kids have gone most of the time, and you've taught there and been an administrator.
Yeah, I mean, they are they are different places. You know, I part of the thing is they serve a very specific community, and that community, it almost to a person values education. You know, like that. A lot of our schools in our system are set up to support the State Department, the U.S. State Department. And sometimes also, you know, companies that are in the city. And so you tend not to have students that are not serious about school. And that's a difference that spoils you really, really quickly. I think I remember, well, I mean, when I was teaching in public schools, I was teaching, you know, an AP class that had 25 students, and I was teaching writing classes of 30 students and all of those. And I remember actually one year in public schools, I had a class of 15 students, and I thought it was the most luxurious thing I could ever imagine. And I went to my first school I taught at was in Ashgabat. My first international school I taught was Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. And it was a school of 100 students, pre-K to 12. And I had classes of, you know, my largest class I think was 6 students, and I had one class that had 2 students in it, and the like to have these conversations. I remember, you know, it was like because there's a lot of second language learners in these schools, there's all these conversations about English only in the hallways. And this is something that my own thinking has evolved a lot on over the years. But at the time, it's like, okay, that's what it is. That's a rule. That's what the rule is. We'll make sure we enforce this English only policy. And man, we would have these meetings where these teachers would be so upset about how do we get this kid to stop speaking Russian in the hallways? And I'd kind of be like, well, I haven't broken up any fights today, and I think that's a positive thing. So I mean, I think that like we're talking about demographics there. The demographic group is very, very different. But I think there's sacrifices that come with that as well, because, you know, there's a diversity in international schools, and it's a diversity that we strive for in I think in the United States in a lot of ways. You know, like you have students from Kiev International School, where my kids were before we left there, had 50 different nationalities in the school, and that, you know, different races, and a lot of understanding of some of the LGBTQ issues that we were just discussing there. And it was this little bubble usually in a country that may not have share those same values, really. And all that stuff is really, really great, but there's a different kind of almost lack of diversity in those schools that I always saw in public schools, which is there's not a huge diversity of worldview, of thinking about how the world is. And so, you know, like I think about mentoring kids in public schools that were, you know, every single day we're thinking about dropping out of school and trying to help them through that. And I think about kids that would show up in my classroom at the end of the day just to talk about a book that they read because they don't have anybody else to talk about a book they read. And those kind of things don't really happen in international schools as much. So I think there's wonderful things about teaching internationally, and I've loved it. I think I like living outside of the United States in a lot of ways. It's not so much because of what international schools are, but I think you also have to recognize that there's balances. There's things you lose from leaving public schools that aren't in international schools, and there's things you definitely gain from the experience. So I don't know if I really answered what you were asking there.
No, you did in so many ways. I've met so many multilingual. You know, they have so many languages that, you know, I think that's one of the things that I thought was such a rich experience in working there. But I also I got to go on new teacher night, the new teachers coming in when I was working at the Moscow school, and they were all from America and Canada, and they were all relatively young teachers. That's a thing that people like to do. And I just think it's something we don't talk about a lot, that there's this very different path you could take in your career where, the stint in an international school can be 2 years and you can move on to a different school. And how many have you worked in?
I mean, this is my 5th location, I guess. Well, actually, I guess 6 if you're including Tbilisi in that, because I'm not really. But I mean, so I was in China, and this again, the second stint in Kiev, I've been at this kind of working from home, so not really working out of a school, so it's a little bit different. But yeah, I guess 6 different places.
So for a teacher who might be listening to this and might be intrigued by the idea of teaching internationally, what advice or what steps would you suggest for somebody like that?
Well, I mean, you asked 2 things there. So I'll start with the steps because that's the easy one. Actually, I mean, getting into international education is relatively easy. There are some schools that hire directly. Those are kind of in the minority, but they're there. Usually it's the systems of schools that do that direct hiring, and there's a few of those around the world. And you pick a place you want to go to, you find where the international school is and find out what they have for openings and apply directly that way. The other way to do it, which is more common, is there's a few different recruiting agencies that recruit international teachers. They're 2 big ones are Search Associates and ISS, International School Services, but there's a few others, and they all do similar things. You basically set up a profile, and then you can search their job listings there, or you can publicize your resume, and people may get in touch with you depending on where your preferences are that you want to be. Some of these recruitment agencies charge it's like $200 a year or something like that for that purpose. Some of them don't. Some of them charge the schools. Excuse me. But it's probably the easiest way. I mean, in normal times before COVID, they did big recruitment fairs, and in Bangkok, and where you could go and there's this. I wouldn't recommend recruitment fairs because they're hundreds of teachers and tens of schools, and a few really schools that everyone wants to go, and it's just like it's a rough environment, but it's the place where a lot of people end up getting hired, because it's where they're trying to hire as many people as possible in a short period of time. So I mean, in terms of advice, I think that for young teachers, it's a really cool way to get into teaching. And I think that if you're a young teacher without a lot of things to hold you back anywhere, then the biggest advice I would give is to, pick out whatever is interesting to you, and not like people, I think a lot of times think about when I move abroad, I want to live in a black and white movie, it's yes, living in Germany would be really cool, living in the Netherlands would be really cool, but you're not going to get a job there. But there are some really amazing places that you can live and probably experience life in a very different way that are outside of those really common places. And yeah, so I guess being open-minded about that's really important. But I also think one of the sort of more difficult things about teaching internationally, I think, is that there's a sort of colonial feel about it. It's this idea in some places that what we do as Americans is we've got it figured out, and so come to our school. And that's not why these schools were set up. They're set up to provide an American education for people that are going to go back into the American education system. But in a lot of these places, they also have a lot of local students that go there because that's, it's the expensive private school in the area. And it gets really easy to fall into that same way of thinking as a teacher and educator. And I think that when you get that way, you miss out on a lot of what makes teaching international schools cool, because all of these schools, so the Kiev school was founded in 1992. We have teachers and staff that have been there since 1992 or 93 or 94, and have just, they know everything about the school and they know everything about the country, and getting to know that side of things is so much more important, I think, than dropping in for a couple of years and only hanging out with the other, American teachers that are there.
Wow. Really great advice. I think it's something that most people don't know exists. I've met so many interesting, very young, like you said, kind of unattached yet. And then they meet someone and they get married, and now they're double trying to get jobs in the next school. And that is definitely where those fairs have been challenging that I've heard about. So I appreciate all that. I'm curious, what are you reading right now?
I have to look up that. I'm so horrible with titles that I read these books and I forget. But I'm positive you know the book. A couple of years ago, before COVID, and interestingly enough, I started up a book club with some friends, and we've been reading books together. One of my reasons for it was that we weren't really reading as much as I tend to like to. And so it's been a great way, and I was actually reading mostly nonfiction. And so it's been a great way to get myself back into reading interesting fiction again. So The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
Our book club read that. We love that.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I mean, I'm not done with it yet, but we're gonna talk about it in a couple of weeks, and yeah, it'll be fun.
I love how it bends time, it bends place, right? Because these different locations and different periods of time, I just thought it was masterful as an idea, and also its execution. But I love all that stuff about what happens when we die. I mean, that's just one of my things that I like to pursue in literature. I really like the way we read Midnight Library as well, which if you haven't read would be another one you might think about.
I think I did read that book. Is it? I don't know. I'll have to look it up. I don't remember if I did or not.
Yeah, believe me, I got to keep a list.
You're well ahead of me. I think I know your lists.
Yeah, right. So what have you been writing? You are just somebody who writes with, I don't know, you have a great voice, and it's the insight, it's the intellect that blends with the feel of thought about everything that's happening around you comes through in your writing. I've always loved reading your writing. So I'm curious.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. That once I got into school administration and my job was writing emails a lot of the time, I found myself writing less and less for myself. And so what I've actually found in the past couple of years, I've been doing a lot with running professional development for the administrators and the organization, and then I'll write about how it went and what we went over and what we did, and I do that for the newsletter. And what I'm finding is that I can't bring myself to write in a very flat way, and so I'm trying to find ways to go about this and write in different ways. So something similar, we there's a publication called the International Educator, TIE Online, and somebody asked me to write sort of an update on what we were doing for the school and how we were supporting teachers during this time and everything. And so same thing, I felt like I needed to write something that was not just a list of facts, but was was more feeling. But I've actually, truthfully, I have also been writing some just about all of this and what I'm going through, and that's really just me writing. So
yeah, but I'm glad you are. I mean, those are the kind of things, you're going to stick them in a drawer and your grandchildren will read them at some point.
If they can read my handwriting, yeah.
Yeah, really. I remember. Kelly, any last thoughts you want to ask him?
No, I just wanted to say, that's, it reminds me, and I don't know if this is too cliche-ish, but, when you're going through what you're going through, I started a pandemic notebook, it's just a way I think of trying to wrap your head around what's going on. And I'm glad to hear that you and your family are safe. And just, it's, here I'm sitting in Southern California, so far away from it. I'm wondering, as maybe a closing thought, do you have any thoughts about, how Americans can support the Ukrainians?
This is something I've struggled with a lot myself, and what you just said there. I mean, it's not. I'm living in Tbilisi. I'm not in any way directly affected by this. I have friends and family that are directly affected by it, but not me. And I think that I've shared this kind of thinking with other people, but I think that part of the problem that we have is this guilt of not feeling like anything that we can possibly do is sufficient. And I think that guilt manifests itself in different ways. Like my own guilt tends to just, again, glue me up, and I end up stopping doing anything. I think for a lot of people that guilt makes them sort of just do everything they possibly can and post, Ukrainian flags and all of that. And I think that everyone's got to find whatever it is that makes them feel better. But I also think that what people have to accept the fact that what that is making themselves feel better. It's not necessarily helping the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's things we can do, like there's lots of small organizations that are doing things on the ground there, that are taking donations. And it's not that hard to find these, to research these and send some money to these things. But no matter what we do, it's insufficient. It's not enough. And I think that's the thing that a lot of Americans and a lot of people even associated with have to come to terms with, is that there's nothing we can do. It's a horrible thing that's happening to a lot of people, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sorry, I don't mean to end on that kind of statement, but
I think it's really honest and true, right? I mean, I started sending money to World Central Kitchen because I knew it was doing good work on the border, particularly in Poland. Yeah, it makes me feel a tiny bit better, but it's not solving anything.
And I think that those things are really
some
important to do. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, it's helping some people who are hungry.
Sure. But I mean, like, all of us want to fix this.
Right. The bigger idea. Right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if we do another 30 of these a year from now, we'll come back and it'll be a much happier conversation. Hopefully things will have ended by then and return to some sense of towards normalcy. I know that'll be a very long time before that happens.
Well, we have our writing group right here in North Conway that could come back together, like a bring back the band moment. And I think if you guys get out here this summer, we got to do it.
I will be there this summer at some point once I finally get around to buying a ticket. So
Awesome.
We'll be there.
I hope we can see you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eben. It was very nice meeting you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Very good to meet you as well.
Say hello to Savetta and your kids. And I'm going to send them a wish in the dark for one. A comb of wishes is another. I've got some fantasy in mind. So.
Okay. Perfect.
All right, Eben. Thank you.
All right.
Stay safe.
Good to see you. Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.